What I realized then was, everyone's talking about diet and exercise, and they're definitely important, but the amount of attention that they get versus, areas such as your circadian rhythm and your light environment is just so disproportionate that there's so much room for improvement. The way red light therapy works is we're giving your cells the exact type of light that they need in order to make energy. So most people have probably heard of the mitochondria. If you haven't heard of it, it's the powerhouse within your cell. So it basically makes the energy currency within every single one of your cells, whether it's a brain cell, liver cell, skin cell, muscle cell. Almost all of your cells in your body have mitochondria within them, and they feed on red and near infrared light. It's exactly what would have happened in nature. So on a base level, what we're essentially doing with red light therapy is giving whatever targeted cell that is more energy so that it can perform its specific benefit. So just to give an example or a metaphor, if you could think of, if you had a doctor, an engineer, and an athlete, you gave each of them more energy, you'd find that each of those three people would be able to perform their specific tasks better. The doctor would be better at helping his patients. The engineer would be better at building bridges or designing bridges, whatever it is. The athlete would be a faster runner. The same concept applies with red light therapy. If you're aiming it at your muscle cells, they're going to be able to deal with inflammation better and to recover, damaged muscle tissue quicker. If you're aiming it at skin cells, your skin's going to be able to produce more collagen. So based on that base understanding, what we've seen in the scientific literature, and as you mentioned, there's thousands of studies, published studies on it now. We've seen a wide range of benefits. Some of the most well-known ones are decreased inflammation, faster muscle recovery, even improved muscle growth. Muscle endurance is another big one, improved hair growth, skin complexion. We see really, really drastic improvements because, as we started with this podcast, it's just one of those areas people aren't paying enough attention to, and there is so much room for improvement.
All right, Nick, welcome to the podcast. It's nice to have you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jorge. Really excited.
So you're really young. We were just talking before the show. I actually thought you were younger than you were. So tell me how you got into, because I'm often asked like, oh, you're so young. Like, why are you getting into health? Like, that's so weird. So tell me how you first got into health and biohacking, and what even is biohacking?
Yeah, thanks for asking me. Yeah, thanks. Super excited to chat with you guys. I've only just come across your audience, but you guys seem to have we're in a very similar niche. So super excited to chat to you. But yeah, I'm a little bit older than you, not much. But how I got into it is I studied a BSc in sports science, and then I did an honors in biokinetics, which is very similar to like physical therapy. And I was taught the traditional, approach to health was diet and exercise. Those are the only two things we really got taught. And there was nothing outside of that. It's just exercise 5 days of the week and eat a ton of vegetables. And, that was the cure to health.
Right.
And then as I was, furthering my studies, I was fortunate enough to go overseas and study through a company called Functional Patterns, which is they primarily focus on movement, but they take a very holistic approach to health. There's, all these different aspects. And one of the areas that I got exposed to was your circadian rhythm and your light environment and how that impacted your health. And what I realized then was, everyone's talking about diet and exercise, and they're definitely important, but the amount of attention that they get versus, areas such as your circadian rhythm and your light environment is just so disproportionate that there's so much room for improvement. Very early on, even before this, I realized that, one of the best approaches to health is to try and reconnect with nature. If you can figure out how your ancestors lived and you can, try and get a little bit closer to that, that is always, to me, that's always made the most amount of sense. And with diet and exercise, I was doing that. So I was like, okay, exercise, try and move, like our ancestors did. We sit way too much these days. So, how do I move more like my body basically evolved to do? When it comes to eating, we're eating a ton of processed food and sugars, completely unnatural, to be in our diet. So going back to, I originally started with the paleo diet, made a lot of sense. When it came to the light environment, the more and more I learned, I just realized that, we're getting it maybe 10% right. There's no connection between, how most people are living their lives being indoors, not getting outside enough and getting exposed to enough natural light, getting way too much artificial light at night and not enough, bright light during the day. that for me, I just realized this is one of those areas that you can have the most bang for your buck. It was when I started incorporating it with my clients, it was just one of those areas where, with a very small amount of changes, you could have huge improvements in, literally things like muscle recovery, sleep quality was getting better, mood, energy levels. There's so many different areas of health that this had effects on. That, yeah, I just realized it was where I was going to have the most impact. And, I still firmly believe that diet and exercise are important, but my kind of mission is to educate and equip people with both the knowledge and the tools to understanding their light environment and how they can, bring themselves a little bit closer to nature in order to bioharmonize and to live their best life. And as you were saying, sorry, you said, biohacking. Biohacking, it's a very interesting term. I think there's a lot of definitions on it, depending on who you ask. I think biohacking is, to me, it's the step of living a modern lifestyle, but using tools around you in order to bring yourself a little bit closer to nature. So some people will call that bioharmonizing, or some people will say the first thing you should do is bioharmonize. So get outside and get enough natural light exposure. That's obviously your first choice. But when you can't do that, how do we supplement that? And that's obviously what we're going to be talking about today is red light therapy. To me, biohacking is that it's using a tool in order to bring yourself, one step closer to nature, but you don't have to quit your job and go and live in the wilderness and, be completely off the grid. Biohacking to me is bridging that gap using modern technology to live a modern lifestyle, but still have primal health.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That makes a lot of sense. I think when people start to talk about biohacking, it kind of gets put into like biotechnology. And to me, it's pretty much what you said. It's not optimal, right? To use like gadgets and devices. Like optimal would be to go and live closer to nature. I totally agree with you. That's literally what we've been hardwired to do since the beginning of time. But if we can't do that in our modern environment, the best step we can do is just, use something that simulates nature, like a red light device, for example. So I'm totally on board with that. You talked about your diet.
100%.
I heard that you were doing stalking your Instagram. I saw that you were doing like an animal-based diet. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I've tried many different diets. When I was still in varsity, I tried the vegan diet, went paleo, I did ketogenic. There was something here called Banting. It's a South African guy, Tim Noakes, who came up with Banting. It's a low carb, high fat diet. And then I came across a podcast. It was one of Joe Rogan's podcasts where he had a guy on there called Dr. Sean Baker. And Dr. Sean Baker is the guy who promoted the carnivore diet. And I think that was one of the last ones for me to ever attempt. And I thought it was crazy because at the time I was doing the Banting diet, which was very high fat, but I was, eating a ton of spinach, kale, broccoli. I was, smashing vegetables in order to be healthy.
Right.
And I thought, what, I've tried all these other variations. Let me try the carnivore diet.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's for everyone, but for myself, it is the best I'd ever felt. And I was already feeling really, really good. But I just found with the carnivore diet, so just going on to completely animal-based diet, it was when I had the best cognition, the best mood, energy, sleep, everything just really kind of aligned to a point that I never knew was possible. And since then, the more and more I've learned about circadian rhythms and seasonality, I don't think it's something that necessarily everyone should do, and it should be necessarily a sustained thing. So I don't always eat an animal-based diet. But for me, it makes a lot of sense that in terms of a seasonal approach, especially for someone, so I'm from a Northwestern region. My ancestors are from French German. So in winter months, it would make sense that my ancestors would have switched over to a very animal-based diet. Fruit especially would have only been available when there was much stronger light cycles, so in your summer months. So it doesn't really make sense for me to be eating like a banana in the middle of winter just because I can import it.
Right.
And when you start looking at and the more and more you start looking at your light environment, you realize the ties between the light that you're being exposed to and the food that you're eating. So just to give you an example, the stronger UV light that you're being exposed to, the higher your vitamin D levels are going to be. And there's a lot of research that shows if your vitamin D levels are low, people don't tend to metabolize carbohydrates as well. And that, you completely makes sense from a evolutionary standpoint is if you were getting more ultraviolet light, it's more likely that there would be fruit in your environment or carbohydrates available at that time. And unfortunately now with imports, exports, you can buy bananas and strawberries and fruit whenever you want, wherever in the world you are. They'll import it. Unfortunately, there are consequences to that because we're trying to trick trying to outsmart Mother Nature by
Right.
moving foods across like that. But unfortunately, our genes haven't had time to catch up with that. So to answer your question, yeah, animal-based diet is primarily what I'll focus on, but I will, in a seasonal approach and focusing on local foods in my region, bring those in and tie those in with the type of light I'm being exposed to and the type of food that can be produced in my region at that time.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you know Dr. Jack Kruse and his work.
Yes, he's probably
Yeah.
the main reason I got into learning about circadian rhythms and light environment. Yeah.
Yeah. Same here, actually. He's the guy that kind of inspired me to think beyond diet and exercise. And going off of what you just said about the seasonality of foods, it's so crazy that we're like so domesticated that we now think like it's normal to eat a banana in the middle of December in northern Michigan, right? Like that's something that I actually never thought about. And then when he said it, it's like, oh, it's so obvious. Like that should have some sort of consequence, right? But I never thought about it that way.
100%. And I was, when I heard exactly that, he says that expression, eating a banana in winter. And what I realized at that time, because I was studying sports science and I was looking at, there's a lot of bodybuilders that trained around us. And I realized how backward most of them have it, because what most people do is they want to get lean in summer months. No, they want to get lean in summer months. And in winter months, they'll do like their bulk,
Right.
and they'll eat as much carbohydrates as they can in winter and bulk up. But as soon as it comes down to summertime, everyone wants to get their beach body ready and they're
Right.
leaning out. But that's actually completely the opposite of what would happen in nature. In nature, you would have, added a bit of weight and actually probably had a little bit of fat by the end of summer. And then in the winter months, you would have fasted more and you wouldn't have had carbohydrates and you would have gotten a little bit leaner. But
Right.
it's just completely the opposite to what people are doing these days.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really seems like our modern environment is just, it's totally geared for not supporting health, for supporting disease. Just totally crazy to think about. Um, okay, so let's talk about your company, Mychondria. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so originally we started out so we always knew we wanted to do something around light environment, teaching people about the light environment and circadian rhythms. And the whole thing started with the Facebook group. So we have a Facebook group called Circadian Warriors. And before we had a product or anything like that, it was just an education platform. So just getting people together to talk about light, circadian rhythms, and anything, that people wanted to talk around in that topic. And then eventually we decided, okay, we need to get, some kind of product out there because there's so many tools people can be using. And the first thing we started with, or my first kind of business that I started with in that group, was blue blocker glasses, like you're currently wearing. And that was to obviously block, the blue light from screens and to help people to improve their sleep at night. And then from there, what's really been our main product that we've launched and are now currently doing is red light therapy, which is just a really great way for people to reconnect or be one step closer to their natural light environment while living that modern lifestyle. And obviously, we'll talk more about red light therapy now. But for me, that's the most exciting part, or the most exciting thing at Mychondria that we're doing at the moment is the results we're seeing and getting from red light therapy.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. When I first got introduced to red light therapy, I bought one like almost immediately because I was convinced partly by Dr. Jack Kruse, but I bought one and I started using it in front of my friends and they just looked at me like I was totally crazy. And then I started showing them the studies. I was like, okay, you know what? Like, let's get into PubMed. Like, there are actual studies on this. There are hundreds, if not thousands of them, which is crazy. So tell me about some of the benefits that you know.
Yeah, so there's a really wide range of benefits, and I think I always, whenever someone asks me about the benefits, I always feel like I need to preface it with a very base understanding of red light therapy, because it can almost seem too good to be true if you just say someone, here's what all these benefits are.
Right.
But on a fundamental level, on a very simple level, the way red light therapy works is we're giving your cells the exact type of light that they need in order to make energy. So most people have probably heard of the mitochondria. If you haven't heard of it, it's the powerhouse within your cell. So it basically makes the energy currency within every single one of your cells, whether it's a brain cell, liver cell, skin cell, muscle cell. Almost all of your cells in your body have mitochondria within them, and they feed on red and near-infrared light. It's exactly what would have happened in nature. So on a base level, what we're essentially doing with red light therapy is giving whatever targeted cell that is more energy so that it can perform its specific benefit. So just to give an example or a metaphor, if you could think of, if you had a doctor, an engineer, and an athlete, and you gave each of them more energy, you'd find that each of those three people would be able to perform their specific tasks better. The doctor would be better at helping his patients. The engineer would be better at building bridges or designing bridges, whatever it is. The athlete would be a faster runner. The same concept applies with red light therapy. If you're aiming it at your muscle cells, they're going to be able to deal with inflammation better and to recover, damaged muscle tissue quicker. If you're aiming it at skin cells, your skin's going to be able to produce more collagen. So based on that base understanding, what we've seen in the scientific literature, and as you mentioned, there's thousands of studies, published studies on it now. We've seen a wide range of benefits. Some of the most well-known ones are decreased inflammation, faster muscle recovery, even improved muscle growth. Muscle endurance is another big one, improved hair growth, skin complexion, decreased joint pain. There's really an extensive list. And often if I don't mention one now that you might be wondering about, a really great idea is to go onto a database, like you mentioned, onto PubMed, literally go and type in whatever it is, be it joint pain or muscle recovery and red light therapy, and you're almost guaranteed that something is going to pop up, because we see such huge improvements in all of these different areas. And I often say it's because we've got a really deficient population to work with, because most people are so starved of red and near infrared light. I would love to do this one day. I plan on doing this one day. I want to go and do a study where we take like some tribe people, like the Hudson tribe or something, and we have some normal indoor civilians, and we get everyone to do red light therapy. I almost guarantee we're going to see huge improvements in everyday people like you and I, but people who are living outside, we probably wouldn't see that much of an improvement, because they're living outside. They're probably getting enough natural light. But if you look at the research, which is based on everyday people who are living indoor lifestyles, such as us, who don't get outside enough, we see really, really drastic improvements, because, as we started with this podcast, it's just one of those areas people aren't paying enough attention to, and there is so much room for improvement.
This episode is brought to you by Energy Bits. Now, if you haven't heard my episode with Catherine Arnston from Energy Bits, I highly recommend you go check that out, because there are wide-ranging science-backed benefits of chlorella and spirulina. In fact, there are thousands of studies which show a positive health effect from chlorella and spirulina algae, from building the immune system to supporting B and T cell production, and they provide essential micronutrients which we might not get enough of in our diet. It aids in energy production and supports detoxification pathways in the liver. And personally, I use algae essentially as a multivitamin, since it contains ample amounts of B vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin K, iron, amino acids, essential fatty acids, and chlorophyll. You can blend them in smoothies, use as toppings on salads, or take them as pills for anyone who can't stomach the strong taste of algae, and I'm totally guilty of that. But why specifically this company? Well, I've extensively researched them. That's kind of why I had them on the podcast. But they are third-party lab tested in the US at an FDA-approved lab to make sure the products actually are what they say they are. So they test for nutrient safety and purity, as well as for heavy metals like lead and mercury, and neurotoxins, so you can be sure that you're getting a safe and pure product. This is a huge problem with the supplement industry, but this company seems to have quality at the highest part of what they do. And the CEO, Catherine Arnston, is pretty awesome, so that helps too. If you want to give chlorella and spirulina a try, Energy Bits is providing a generous 20% discount code using code LIVEDAMNWELL. Hope you check them out. Now, back to the show. Yeah, definitely. And something that you said is so true. We have become so scared of the sunlight. Like, it's insane. There was recently a post I saw on Instagram, which of course, like, you got to take with a grain of salt. I'm not sure how true it is, but apparently it was a quote by a dermatologist, which said, there is no safe amount of sun exposure. And I was just like, really? Are you kidding me? That just completely flies in the face of thousands of years of us. I mean, walking around naked, being in the sunlight at all times, that just makes no sense to me,
It's crazy. We had a blog post a while back on tans, and it's the same thing. I found a quote from a dermatologist which said there was no such thing as a healthy tan. Said any form of tanning was bad, and it obviously meant you'd had too much sunlight exposure, which is so crazy when you think of it. why do we find tans attractive? Why do people actually spend money to go to a tanning salon and get a tan? It's because intuitively your brain says to you, if someone's got a tan, that person's healthy, he's a fit mate, that's someone I should probably reproduce
That's a
with. And
good
if
point.
someone's very pale, you think that person's probably sick. I mean, and literally, what are you going to believe? Your natural instincts that you've evolved with, or some dermatologist who is probably funded by some sunscreen, whatever it is, kind of saying something as crazy as any sunlight is bad for you. When we started with blue blocker glasses, I find this absolutely crazy. It is so easy for people to go out and buy a pair of sunglasses and go, oh, I'm protecting my eyes from natural sunlight. People don't even think twice. Yet we would have to spend huge budgets on creating courses and adverts and putting out information on blog posts to educate people why you shouldn't be staring at an artificial light, such as your computer screen. People don't question that, but yet we go, oh, well, natural light is bad for us. We must wear glasses to protect us from sunlight. And a dermatologist will come out and say, no, sunlight is good. And I bet you that dermatologist said absolutely nothing about the dangers of artificial light.
Absolutely. It's just like they're not trained on that stuff. And it's just, yeah, that's something I've seen after interviewing several dozen doctors now. It's not that it's not that they're dumb. It's just that they're not taught that at all. What their curriculum is pharmaceuticals, and then like a tiny bit of nutrition, like 20 hours most, their entire med school curriculum. So it makes sense that they're just simply not aware of it and working under this rigid paradigm of basically just dealing with drugs.
100%. And it's also, we've been talking about it quite a bit, but this whole primal approach and how did our ancestors live? That is something they never really look at or get taught. They get taught symptom-based treatment. How do you treat a specific symptom?
Right.
Not the underlying cause is never looked at.
So you talked a little bit about the mechanism of how red light can have an effect on your cells and essentially like power your cells. How does that happen? Like, take me to the cellular level. How does that happen?
So within your mitochondria, there's something called the electron chain transport. And basically what is happening is within one of the membranes, you're trying to create, what your mitochondria is trying to do is create this gradient where it will pump out a whole bunch of hydrogens to the outside of the membrane along this chain. And then by the end of that chain, it basically uses that gradient of a whole bunch of hydrogens outside flowing into an area where there isn't a lot of hydrogen. It uses that gradient to spin a turbine. So think of if you have, a glass of water and you put a little bit of salt in the water. If you've got a whole bunch of salt, it's going to disperse and evenly go across that area. So very similar, if you could think of what's happening in the mitochondria, it's taking little hydrogen molecules and pushing it on to the outside. And at the end, it's allowing them back in because of that gradient where you've got so much hydrogen outside and then a little bit on the inside. And then that is spinning a turbine. And I know that probably doesn't make complete sense if you've never heard of the mitochondria or anything like that. So again, another metaphor to kind of help that make sense is if you can think of a hydro station where a hydro station will use flowing water in order to spin a turbine, which generates electricity. It's very similar to what happens within your mitochondria, is that gradient is then spinning a turbine, which basically creates the process of making ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is your cell's energy currency. And how red basically helps this process is it jumps within this electron transport chain and increases the amount of hydrogen molecules being pushed out. So now you get this increase in proton gradient, and that helps to spin the turbine faster, which then generates more energy. I know it's not the simplest. There's probably a simpler way to explain it, and I hope that makes complete sense. But in a base over sense, that's what's happening within the mitochondria.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Basically, let me see if I'm getting this right. To paraphrase, you can think of kind of like a hydroelectric dam. And and the hydrogen would be the water in this case, right? And the water flowing out of the mitochondria would spin up this machinery, creating ATP, and red light seems to make that work better.
100%. Yeah. So it seems to upregulate that process. It's one of the ways that it works. There are other ways. So there's also, we're not in saying that. It's not completely clear if that is the way that it works. There's also some research which theorizes that another kind of aspect of it is that red and near infrared light helps to free nitrogen oxide within your cells, which helps to increase blood flow and oxygen delivery within the cell. What we do know for certain, though, is that the end result is more ATP production. The theory is that it is the second chromophore, which is basically something that absorbs light within this electron transport chain. The main theory is that red and near infrared light is absorbed by this part of your mitochondria, which increases this process. But there are other theories. We do know the end result is that ATP production, that energy production within the cell.
I want to take us back to something that we started talking about earlier with bananas in northern Michigan. So we didn't talk about deuterium. We talked about vitamin D, right? But deuterium is something that I have become really interested in, especially Jack Cruz, just like, that was the platform which I started to learn all of this stuff from. But I interviewed Dr. Joel Gould, who is also super interested in biophysics. And I think he consults with or used to work with the Centers for Deuterium Depletion. And it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're in the sunlight a lot, your ATPase also starts to spin faster and you start to make that molecular machinery work better. And if you have too much deuterium, you might like plug it up, so to speak.
If you have too much, say the last part again. If you have too much deuterium, you might plug it up.
Yes.
Yeah. So deuterium is essentially it's an isotope. So it's a heavier form of hydrogen. So everyone's probably heard of hydrogen, but you actually get different variations where technically on the structural point, or on the periodic table, they're both classified as hydrogen, but deuterium is the heavier version. And that turbine that we were speaking about that spins, that red light is helping to spin, if that has got a heavy form of hydrogen, such as deuterium on it, it's going to spin slow. And that's it's physics. You think if something's lighter, if you've got a lighter turbine, it's going to be able to spin faster. And that's exactly where deuterium comes in. If you've got too much deuterium within your cells, then there's a higher probability that your cell is trying to spin a heavy turbine. And therefore, you're not going to have as efficient production of energy or ATP.
Right. Yeah. And I didn't know this too, but it seems like the work that the Center for Deuterium Depletion is doing, it seems like even like GMO foods, non-organic foods, and, like tropical fruits like bananas, mangoes, all the things that require a lot of strong UV light in order to grow them have the highest concentration of deuterium, which makes a lot of sense with the seasonal eating that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I can't remember the specific reason why, but I know that plants will also send all of their deuterium to their fruit. So within that entire plant in the tree or bush or wherever that, let's say a banana bush, not a banana tree. I learned that recently. Bananas don't go on trees; they grow on bushes. That bush will what it will do is it'll push all of its deuterium out to the fruit. I'm not exactly sure why. I'm not sure if it's a survival mechanism, but again, in fruit, you're going to get a variation of deuterium forms of hydrogen.
Interesting. I didn't actually know that. That's very interesting. Okay. So we've talked about several benefits now. I've heard that there are also some pretty cool interactions that it has with collagen. Tell me a little bit about that. Helps to
you mean the production of collagen?
Yes, right.
Yeah. So within skin cells, we know that if they're exposed to red and near infrared light, we see an increased production of collagen. And I think, that again just comes down to the base mechanism of your skin cells. If they've got more energy, they're going to be able to work more effectively. And one of the roles of your endothelial cells is to produce collagen, which is going to make your skin look supple and young. But then on the other hand, and this is often needs to be spoken about, is on a systemic point of view. If you're aiming red light therapy, let's say for instance at your face for collagen production, it's not just going to do that. You're also going to be helping your cells to deal with inflammation. So if you can think of your skin cells now have less inflammation to deal with, they're also going to have more capacity in order to produce more collagen. And I mean, I've seen some really good research. If people want to look up red light therapy and just type in red is probably a great one, because then you'll see some studies that have actually got like before and after photos, and you can see people's skin actually literally, I think it was like a 12-week study, gets a whole bunch more plump and wrinkle lines literally start disappearing. People literally anti-age from red light therapy, and it's that increased collagen production and just making the skin healthier in general.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. Let's talk about what people should look for in a red light device.
Very good question. So there is a bit of a problem in the industry at the moment because unfortunately, if you don't have testing equipment, it just looks like a red light. And there's a lot of devices on the market that could just be fancy party lights. And they probably have some benefits because if you're using a red light instead of blue light, it's going to be a good light replacement in the evenings. But there's a big gap at the moment between what's in the research, what's being used, the medical grade devices, and then what a lot of the research has been based on has been lasers primarily, actually. And there's a big gap between that and what are being sold as home devices, because most red light therapy companies, and that includes us, one of the things we'll state is, red light therapy has been featured in thousands of clinical studies and has been proven X, Y, and Z, all these different benefits. But the home devices that are on the market at the moment can be very different to the ones that are used in the studies. So I would say before we even talk about the specifications, the number one thing to look for with a red light therapy company or a device is to look for results. Look for their own results to actually see, are people getting benefits using their own devices? And you do see this. You don't see this with every single company. A lot of companies will just show the studies and then just have their product. And I think we've only been in the industry for 3 years now, and we have literally entire pages on our website where you can see testimonials and video reviews of people talking about the results they've gotten with our devices. I think it's an absolute essential if you're looking for a device. The first thing to look for is to make sure that the company has their own results with their own devices and their own customers. And then on the technical side, so there's a few things. The main one to look at is probably the light's intensity. So it can vary depending on how close you are to the device. The further away from the device you are, the lower the light's intensity. You probably want to be aiming between 80 to 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, which is just a measurement of light intensity or irradiance. But more important than the actual number, 80 to 100 is a good region to look at. But more important than the number is that the company is transparent about at what distance they took that measurement. So we market our devices all around 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 6 inches away from the device. And there are some companies that won't tell you how far away they were from the device. So they'll just say 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, when meanwhile that was right up against the device. So if you're a couple of inches away from the device, you have no idea, what kind of light intensity you're getting. And a lot of underpowered devices will do this with, or companies with underpowered devices will take those measurements right up against it and not be fully transparent. With our larger devices, we even go up to 60 inches in terms of the specifications, because we have a lot of our customers are like athletes or people who are physical therapists. They're a little bit further away from their device when they're doing the treatment. So you want to know, what kind of dose you're getting from your device. So the main one, light intensity, and then the transparency of the distance they were for that. And then another big one I'm sure you're familiar with is electromagnetic fields, or EMFs. That's something Jack Kruse talks about a lot. And electromagnetic fields are essentially, or let's say non-native ones, are basically just electric fields and magnetic fields that we get exposed to from things like our cell phones, Wi-Fi, any electrical device or anything with an electrical flow will emit some kind of magnetic field. And whether or not it's completely, whether or not everyone believes in it, we as a company definitely do say that it's safer to limit your amount of EMF exposure. And if you want a good quality device, you've got to make sure that it is one that is marketed as EMF free, or at least is transparent about what the levels of EMF is when you're doing your treatment. Now, one of the good things with electromagnetic fields is the further away from a device you are, the lower they are. It drops off pretty quickly. So with our devices, we're kind of killing two birds with one stone by being very high powered. You can do your treatment at 6 inches and beyond. And at 6 inches and beyond, there's 0 electromagnetic fields with our devices. Whereas with other ones, if you've got to be really close, you're going to find that you're going to be within a magnetic field, which is not going to, if you are worried about it, it's just going to be an excessive form of electromagnetic field exposure. So those are the first two specifications, and then the last one would be flicker rate. Sorry, I'm getting into detail with all of these specs here.
No, that's great. That's great.
So all of our electricity grids they run on alternating currents, which basically means that it switches on and off at a really high rate. It might be 50 or 60 hertz, depending on where in the world you are, if you're Europe or America. But basically what happens is with most LED lights, the cheaper ones especially, they will flick off and on at a really high rate because of the alternating current that they're receiving. So it's not normally, you can't perceive it with your eye, but if you take like your phone and you do a slow motion video of like a cheap LED light, you'll see that it flickers off and on at a really high rate. And even though your eyes can't perceive it, there is quite a bit of research that shows a flickering LED can lead to side effects such as headaches and eye strain, because it's creating this subliminal stress within your brain. So a high quality red light therapy device should also have drivers installed within them, which basically, in a nutshell, converts this alternating current into a direct current so that you don't have that flickering effect. So those last 2 points, the EMF and the flicker rate, those are just really important if you really want to be getting the most bang from your buck with your red light therapy device. Why take 3 steps forward and then take 1 step back? Because red and near infrared light is extremely healthy for you. But while you're doing that, why would you want to expose yourself to excessive EMF levels? Or if you're doing that, why would you want to have the risk of this flickering light causing a subliminal stress within your brain?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And to those people who do not yet believe in the effects, the negative effects of EMFs, you are living like 40 years in the past, because the research is really, really clear. Like, I'm not just saying that. Like, if you go and look into an independent scientific organization, the Environmental Health Trust, they are probably the single best source of information about electromagnetic fields. On their website, they literally have hundreds of peer-reviewed studies. They have thousands of studies which show a biological effect on tissues. So if you are still on that boat where you think we should be wearing tinfoil hats, that's totally not the case, right?
I'm actually so glad that you pushed that, because I stepped around that right now, and I wasn't that. I completely am on the same page as you about this, but it's so hard because when you're teaching someone something new about red light therapy, there's so much evidence behind it. I don't want to come across as a tinfoil hat person, but you're so right. There's so much evidence around EMF fields now that if you still believe that they're not having an effect on you, then you're living under a rock, or you're just avoiding the research, or you don't want to believe it. You've got, the cognitive dissonance. You're not wanting to see these things. It's true. It's out there, man. There's definitely effect. I mean, you put your steak in a microwave. There, you've got EMF. Those are electromagnetic fields. You put your steak in there and you leave it in there for 10 minutes. That thing dries out. That's meat. That's what you're made of. If you're being exposed to that, what do you think is going to happen to yourself? Put yourself in a microwave all the time. There's an effect of EMFs on your body.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually the FCC, which regulates, all of the telecommunications in the United States, they got sued this past year by several scientific organizations. So this is all happening. The problem is, like, COVID was, the highlight of everything. So all of these other relatively smaller issues were kind of set aside, but they're literally being sued for being known as like a captured agency, where they are basically people that worked for the telecommunications industry were working for the regulatory committee, which is supposed to regulate the telecommunications. So totally backwards. Okay, so what wavelengths should one look for in a red light device?
So technically, red light therapy is anywhere between 600 and 1,000 nanometers. So that starts at like your orangey red and then goes all the way up to near infrared. Ideally, you want to make sure that you've got something within the red spectrum. So that's between 600 and 700 nanometers. And then you also want to have something in the near infrared spectrum. The most well-researched is 850 nanometers. And all of these wavelengths, well, let's say the red and the near infrared wavelengths, they're going to work very similarly, where they will upregulate the mitochondria. The main difference between them is the depth of penetration. So the higher wavelengths, your near infrared, is going to penetrate deeper into your tissues. So for something like joint pain, you would want more of the near infrared. But then for something that's more superficial, so let's say your skin tissues, those will do really well with the red wavelengths. Now, if you're getting a good red light therapy device, it should have a combination. Make sure you're getting, hitting all the killing two birds with one stone. There's a better expression than that. But so like our devices, we use two wavelengths within the red range. So we use 630 and 660 nanometers. And then we use 850 nanometers as the near infrared spectrum. And then a device, if you've got all that, you're basically making sure that you're targeting the outer layers of your tissues and the deeper layers at the same time.
Got it. And what's the dosage? So like how much time and what times a day should people use it?
So dosage varies quite a lot depending on the benefit. Especially with skin benefits, you can get away with really low doses. So something like between 3 and 6 joules per centimeter squared. And it gets a little bit intricate. There is ways to calculate that. Our devices all come with an online calculator, so there's an easy way to figure that out. But lower dosage, like between 3 and 6 joules per centimeter squared, is what you would work with for skin tissues. And then deeper benefits, or even more systemic benefits, something like sleep quality. The studies normally use a dose around 30 joules per centimeter squared, so like 10 times that amount. And to put that into time sessions, and obviously this is me speaking on the Mychondria devices, it might be a lot more if you're using a very underpowered device. But the skin benefits could be within like 2 minutes. And then sleep benefits would probably be around, it's like, I think it's 8 or 9 minutes. It's around that region when you're targeting like 30 joules something for sleep quality. Time of day, it's not too important, the time of day, because red and near infrared light is such a dominant type of light that we got from the sun. It doesn't play a very significant role in setting our circadian rhythm. Something like blue light is really important to, be careful. You don't want to expose yourself to blue light at night, because then you're going to be offsetting your circadian rhythm. But because, we've always been exposed to red and near infrared, be that from sunlight, be that from a fire, even be that from another human body, that's, any heat being emitted is actually infrared light. Because it's been such a dominant type of light that we're exposed to, the timing doesn't matter that much. What we always say, the most important thing is consistency. So when are you going to make sure that you're going to do your red light therapy, every single day? For most people, that is morning time. I find it extremely, it's a great part of my morning routine is to include the red light therapy at that time. And you can also habit stack it, which is really cool. I'm sure you're probably familiar with atomic habits or habit stacking. And with red light therapy, you don't just have to sit in front of your device. A lot of our customers will do like Wim Hof breathing or meditation or even doing some journaling. It's really great to incorporate that as part of a morning routine in order to be consistent with it. Even at nighttime, you can do your red light therapy sessions. There's only one time I'd say is be a little bit careful with it is just before you're going to bed, aiming it directly at your face. It's not that red and near infrared light has that much of a circadian effect, as we spoke about now. Blue light is definitely the worst for that. But because the lights are so powerful, it doesn't really matter what the color is. You're going to find it somewhat stimulating, especially if you're aiming it at your face. The only time to really be careful is like an hour, within an hour of going to bed. But otherwise, more important is your consistency. When are you going to be able to fit it into your routine?
Yeah, this has been a very, very informative episode so far. Unfortunately, that is almost everything that I wanted to cover during this podcast. So usually what I have people do at the end of the podcast is a rapid fire rounds question. So number 1, what is the most important habit that you personally do every single day to support your health?
I'm not going to say red light therapy. You know what I'm going to
Yeah,
say?
You
is
better
the
not
most
say red
important
light
thing I do
therapy.
every day. The most important thing, and this has been something that I've done in the last 2 months, is not looking at my cell phone or not switching it off airplane mode for the first 2 hours. So I don't look at my phone, emails, anything like that. I make sure that I do my workout. I do all my other habits. The main habit is leaving my phone and my computer away from me for the first 2 hours and starting my day without it. I think it's a terrible dopamine fix. I think it trains your brain to be distracted. And for me, I can feel like my brain's completely different based on doing that. That's my answer.
Yeah, no, I do the same. Number 2, what is the most important lesson that you've learned recently or in the pandemic through a book, anything?
I think the most important thing that I've learned recently. So I read a very good book recently called The Mastery of Self. And one of them is about self-acceptance and looking at your own flaws. And I think one of the things I've learned recently is by accepting my own flaws in who I am and the things that I need to work on, I've become more tolerable of other humans. So I think not putting yourself on a pedestal and expecting yourself to be perfect helps you a lot to deal with other people and to actually truly see other people for who they are. And I know this is completely off topic, but rapid fire questions, man, you got me.
What advice, I know you're not too far from 20 years old, but what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Start focusing on your light environment. I'm going to throw that one in now.
Okay. Okay. All right. And the most important question of this podcast, do you shine red light on your balls?
Absolutely. Every single day I do at least 3 to 5 minutes in that area. It's, we're talking about, obviously, most of us don't get outside enough, but even when we do get outside, especially for males, it's that one area we're not exposing, our genitals don't get exposed to enough sunlight. And it's where testosterone is made. It's so important that area gets some form of natural light energy. Obviously, you don't want to burn them with ultraviolet light.
Right.
You wouldn't want to cook that area, but it's probably one of the most important areas that you can be exposing to red and near infrared light. Yeah.
Yeah, so important. I don't know how much research there is on that, but definitely makes a lot of sense. Like vitamin D3 being made right there topically makes a lot of sense. All right, man.
Look, there
Yeah,
isn't actually a lot of research. So I just want to add one point. So
no
we've
worries.
recently done a blog on this, and there isn't a lot of large trial research. So there's research using bright light boxes, which isn't specifically just red and near infrared light in humans, and that's shown really positive results. Also with sperm motility, so basically males will become more fertile, and that's always correlated with improvements in testosterone. But then there are a lot of animal studies where basically they've done it with rats, and they've shown red and near infrared light has improved testosterone. And then there's a ton of anecdotal things. Ben Greenfield reports using red light therapy to triple his testosterone
Yeah.
by aiming it at his nuts, in his testes.
Yeah, the technical term for it, right?
Technical term is a better word.
All right, man. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Cool. So on Instagram, that's probably the best place to find Mychondria. So it's at Mychondria. It's MYCHONDRIA. Our website's mychondria.com. And then if you want to find me on Instagram, that's circadian_warrior.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate your time. This was an amazing episode. Hope to have you back on again at some point to talk about any other thing relating to circadian rhythms or health.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.